All right, great, everybody. Yeah, so thanks for joining. This is the first SIG API subproject meeting around declarative APIs and linters. So thanks for joining. Kind of as the first meeting, we're just going to go through some of the ongoing projects in the space, and happy to open up to other folks as well. On the agenda today, we can just start from the top. But the first item is related to kind of just discussing and explaining declarative validation. So I'm going to go into this. Great. And so can everyone see my screen here?
Yes.
Awesome. I'm just going to go with a yes on that one. So yeah, declarative validation is a feature initially started that went beta in 1.3.3. And the goal was to pretty much take a lot of the validation code that currently exists kind of in a bespoke manner across APIs and turn it into these simple declarative tags. So clearly that's aligned with this declarative API goal. Just gonna go, and then yeah, feel free to stop me too if you have any questions. But here you can imagine, throughout the API, you might have to specify the minimum value for an int field, or maybe like a max length on a list. And these are all kind of done in bespoke ways throughout the code. And that's just like a small example. So those are open API style tags, but there's also other tags. And so, I guess the first thing would be, what is the focus of declarative validation? It's mainly around these K8s native types currently versus, custom resources, but we are hoping to align those. So in 1.3.3, we migrated replica set, a field replica set, as kind of a proof of concept. And then in 1.3.4, we did a more complicated validation for certificate signing requests, just to kind of prove out that we can do complex validations. And in 1.3.5, we're hoping to migrate a number of DRA validations for the resource type. And so, yeah, just at a high level, the way this works is you kind of attach tags to, you add tags to the types.go file, and you also register the types as being, enrolled in, similar to the defaulter generator, if folks are familiar, with this declarative validation tool. And then it'll generate validation code that you then wire up in the strategy. And so here is just an example of some of the tags that currently exist. A lot of these are open API style tags. And there's also some additional tags around doing each key in a list, kind of subfield for shared objects. And then since then, there's some union logic, and there's also ratcheting logic, which we can talk about. But the gist is, there's a tremendous amount of Go code, and that's kind of the goal here. And so just similarly, again, to kind of just highlight, the goal here would be to take something like DRA, which has, a lot of validation logic that's kind of, extracted away from the user. It's hard to maybe exactly understand what the validations are for all the resource objects, and turn that into something. These tags are spec'd out. So it's obviously currently there are some tags, but they don't actually, most tags, they might affect the open API spec. They don't actually affect the logic. So API reviewers have to kind of manually navigate each of these tags and make sure that the actual code does that. The goal would be, again, these tags are not exactly correct, but the idea would be that, if declarative validation kind of is fully plumbed through, then you would just specify tags on the API type. And this essentially would be ideally all of it, but at least 80% of the validations on the objects. And then this way too, you have kind of this declarative API that you could then roll into, like, generate open API, like more comprehensive open API information, this kind of thing. And just as an example too, it allows for some horizontal API niceties, for example, ratcheting. So this is an example PR around tightening IP ratcheting that was done. This is circa 1.3.3. These slides are a bit old, so apologies for that. But the idea would be to do this, someone has to kind of be an expert in the core logic of IP valid, like how the validation works, kind of tunnel their way through everything and ratchet all the areas of importance. But with something like a horizontal logic around validation, this becomes a lot easier, where ratcheting is built into the tooling. So here's like a small example, but the gist would be that you could have ratcheted tags, so to speak, that do a kind of ratcheting check. And there's also default ratcheting, where if an item is not modified, then it will not be validated, and kind of different semantics around that, but just to make that easier for everybody. And so, similar to the goals of the subproject meeting, which around declarative APIs, the goal is to kind of get a shift left. Another goal of this is to shift left. So ideally, if we had these validations, it might be possible to validate objects earlier in the life cycle for developers, which could be a win there. And also it allows for some nice linting, where if you have these tags, then we can kind of more easily early on enforce things like each object might need optional or required. You can't have both. That's just like a simple one, but you can imagine other things where any conflicting tags or hierarchical tags that don't make sense are kind of brought to the forefront earlier on in the dev life cycle. So yeah, here we have some of the goals of the project. So here we have eliminating 90% of net new handwritten validation code, converting about like half of these. So it's mainly targeting the new code, ideally to make it easier for folks to write new APIs, but also migrating a significant portion of existing code, to keep the same performance in the past, and make it easier to test. And also we had this rollback statement. I think that we're kind of past the go no go point now, but that was like a goal also to make sure we could roll back. And then yeah, just briefly, essentially it's a code generator. You had the tags, code is generated, and then there's a process for registering types. I'm happy to go more in depth in this, but I just hope to kind of give folks just a brief overview there. Cool. So that is declarative validation. And I just wanted to start off with that to explain the goals of one of the projects, to highlight kind of the broader goal of a number of the sub-projects we try to bring in here, which is around simplifying API development, improving the review experience, as it's a bottleneck for the project, reviewing these APIs and doing so well and kind of onboarding new API reviewers. So to kind of make that easier. Hopefully, this is kind of not been something we've tackled currently, but definitely a goal of the project is to bridge the native API types and CRD types, and also to kind of facilitate automating things. So you saw like the linter as an example, but with more declarative APIs, hopefully we can automate parts of the API process for reviewing them, creating them, testing them. Cool. So that was a lot of information. I just thought I'd maybe stop now and ask for any questions if anyone was unfamiliar with the project, wants to get involved, or just has ideas maybe on how this work might relate to their work or other projects. Joel, yeah, I see your hand up.
Yeah, hopefully this is a quick one. So on the slide deck, I think there are a few of the different markers that maybe are out of date at this point. I just wondered if there is a comprehensive, up-to-date guide of a list of all of the markers that have been implemented, what the official names came out as, what their behaviors might be. Context for this is I'm thinking about how we're going to lint these in the future, and also how we'll implement them in controller gen for CRDs. So having a reference to work from for those would be really useful.
For sure, yeah. So let's jump back to I think I am here. So this is the current official documentation around declarative API, declarative validation. And let me just jump into this. So here there is a list of the current tags that that we support. I would say the one caveat is maybe just wait 1 week, because I'm pretty much the stability levels just recently kind of were aligned. So let me just put these are not all marked stable. So maybe I can just message you after this, but essentially I can update these to have the stability level. So we have gone through, I think based on prior conversations that either you might have had with Lilith, but here is a list just to maybe kind of warm things up as far as this, but I would not say that all these are stable per se. So I will go and update these with this stability level column, and then the ones marked stable there would be something that you can feel comfortable using in the long term. So hopefully, does that answer your question there, Joel?
Yeah, no, that's a really good reference. In terms of the stability, I know originally there was an ask for this all to be kind of revertible. Like if we wanted to, if the project didn't go anywhere and it kind of stalled, the ability to kind of rip it all out and go back to what we were doing before. You mentioned we're kind of past that point. Is that definite? Because I'm concerned about enabling all of this specifically in controller tools and controller gen, and then CRD authors start using it, and then we go, oh, actually, it's it's been ripped out of upstream.
For sure. So yeah, maybe we can just talk about as Lalit on the call. We have pretty much
Yeah.
have a oh yeah. Well, do you want to talk about some of the stability level? I know that you're
Yes.
working on the KEP update, but I don't know if you want to address that.
Yes, I can answer this. So, Joel, there will be few stable tags, and API machinery will back it, and those will be always supported. There will be alpha tags for which semantics can change and can be taken back. So we are discussing like what we can do. Only stable tags can go to controller gen for CRDs, because for native types those will be always supported. And similarly, we can follow the same content for the and for alpha tags. So we have a graduation process. That will take API machinery board, leads board to graduate. So I think there will be a proper process. So we are streamlining the process. We'll document it in the CAP, and we'll also update the documentation according to it.
Okay, that's great. So if there are tags that are now considered stable and we know we're going to support, I think that alleviates my concern for moving those ones forwards, at least in controller gen. Stefan, I just wanted to check that with you as well. Assume.
Yeah, I wanted to also answer that question about if we're going to back this out. So we did have a discussion earlier this cycle, Tim, myself, David Eads, a few others, and we agreed to go forward. So we're actually like, we still have the ability right now to back everything out. We still have handwritten validation for everything, but we did make an informal agreement to go forward. What that's like, let's work to support DV only validations is going to be like once we start using that, that'll be the major inflection point where all of a sudden ripping it out wouldn't be a very straightforward mechanical task. It would involve going and writing handwritten validation to replace the declarative validation. We're saying we're not intending to do that at this point. We're far enough along. There's enough things this is useful for. We wouldn't ever see a reason to do that. Now, I will caveat that with one thing, which is it is a non-goal of the project to 100% replace handwritten validation. We consider these two things fairly complementary, right? Like, so there can always be a handwritten validation, but hopefully what you'll see in a release or two is if somebody is adding new handwritten validation, that's a really strong indicator. This is a really complicated rule, and the best thing we can do is just write it and go and call it good. Things that are very simple, like checking length limits and formats and other things, we would never need to do that way.
Cool. Thanks all.
Cool. I think there's a hand. Was it any hands up? No, we're good. Oh yeah, and then just to clarify, I know Joe mentioned the DV only, but the idea would be that currently for the migrations, when using declarative validation, you have to have like a parallel set of handwritten logic because of this backup rule. But I think in 1.3.6 we will start for the simplest tags that we've kind of proven out. The ability to write new validation code using just declarative validation, and at that point, we would have gone past kind of that barrier. So just to explain maybe this naming here. Cool. And then yeah, I think just going along with this, just trying to think if there's anything I can talk about these things later, but essentially as part of the project, one of the pieces that kind of keeps coming up is codifying best practices. So, we've discussed ratcheting. Immutability is something that I've been working on also, but some of these concepts don't have necessarily, and Tim actually just wrote, I think updated with some best practices, but there are just validation best practices that are generally not adhered to strictly across the project. And also there's some semantics like immutability, for example. What does it mean for a list to be immutable across all the types is not the same. So we're also hoping to use this as a forum to hopefully kind of open up those discussions and have everyone align on those best practices and also what the semantics are. So if you have any opinions there, or you've done maybe some digging and you've kind of identified anything, yeah, feel free to raise those as maybe great conversations for future topics. Ones that we have discussed, I don't know, Jan Rui and myself kind of just chatting with folks is about immutability and ratcheting. So if these are anything that you also have been curious about, or some, feel free to kind of ask anything there. But yeah, just kind of wanted to note that, like, as the project evolves, that's definitely going to be something that we bring up. And then this is as far as declarative validation specifically, the goal right now is to kind of build out this core framework. But as we noted, we hope to migrate a large number of APIs, and also we want folks making new APIs to use the tooling. So we mentioned DV only is not quite; it's kind of coming up in 1.3.6. But the kind of call to action as we kind of build out this project and also try to use these tags more broadly would be to have folks start using them, and to also help with those migrations. So that's just kind of the as we evolve, we can kind of discuss that more, but that's just like a note to the folks that we are hoping for folks to kind of use the tags and iterate on them. Awesome. No hands. Joel, did you want to talk about Kube API linter?
Yeah, I put some notes in. So if anyone isn't familiar, Kube API linter, we started about a year ago trying to build out a project that would be able to enforce the mechanical parts of an API review just through Golang CI lint. So with that, we've got 22 rules implemented so far. There's 15 open issues for other rules to implement. So we've made some really good progress there. There's a whole bunch of projects who have adopted this. Cluster API have adopted it across a bunch of their stuff, which is great. We're using it within OpenShift. And recently we've started enabling it in KK as well. So at the moment, we've only got 2 rules there. Progress is slower than I would like on KK, but that's mainly my fault, so I can't blame anyone else. In terms of upcoming things, there's some documentation changes around enabling with Golang CI lint v2. We're going to try and create an entry point so we can actually start shipping. One of the complaints that I've had so far is that there are 2 different ways you can use it. One is as a module, and the other is as a plugin for Golang CI lint, but there's no standalone binary. So that is something that we're going to work on. And then so far we haven't published any releases. So my plan is to start looking at publishing a v010 that people can start depending on. My target is to get that done before KubeCon. I may or may not. And then the other thing I've got in mind is, obviously this has come up on this call, but the Kate's markers and how they're going to change things in the linter, the kind of things going forward. But yeah. That's kind of a brief update on where Kube API linter is at.
Awesome. And then for the KK usage, I was curious, what are those 2 rules? I'm actually not.
So we've got so far one is SSA tags, which is every list should have a list type tag set, and then that validates also, like, if you do this type map, you have to have at least one list map key. If you have a list map key, it actually checks that field exists. Which is kind of useful because we've seen examples in KK where that wasn't true. And then on the condition side, there's a bunch of expected list type, is it meta v1 condition, these kinds of things that exist in the API conventions. There's lots more to enable. It's just a case of getting around to it. I know one that we were talking about recently is the default or required rule. So you can't have a default and a required field. That should be an easy one to pick up next. There are some that are more complicated. I did look at enabling serialization checking. So we've got 2 rules, one called required fields, one called optional fields, that checks that those serialize correctly. So you've got the right emit empty, emit 0, pointer for field, depending on what it is, whether the 0 value is valid, etc. Those are working well on CRDs at the moment, but have some dependencies on knowing data about the types. So some of those are blocked currently on the declarative validation stuff. So yeah, I'm kind of going through and finding the low-hanging fruit in some of my spare time and adding those in. As we get further along in DV, I suspect we'll be able to enable a lot more of these.
Yeah, I really love the optional required default and serialization linting, because I've seen that just be kind of something that API reviewers have to obsess about, because if it goes wrong, it goes wrong horribly, and there's 5 things to look at and think about. So I think that would be like an amazing time saver for API reviewers.
Yeah, we've got it enabled in CAPI, we've got it enabled in the OpenShift APIs, and it really does just pick it up. And some people are getting a bit, people ask me, well, why do I have to put a max length? Why do I have to put a minimum length? Why does every integer have to set that the minimum value is greater than 0 or whatever? It's prompting a lot more people to think about the way that these fields behave, which I think is a good thing, spreading the knowledge. But yeah, it is saving time in the long term.
The pushback is just because there's a little bit of laziness there, and they know that they now have to go think about something, and it's like, well, yes, we're pushing what you were going to make your client think about to you.
Yeah, 100%. I've gone from being an API reviewer and therefore a linter to now explaining how the linter works to everyone, which is not quite what I intended, but it is working.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Okay, for sure. Yeah, and then I'm just looking at the chat. I see Bryce mentioned, is there a canonical place to identify what work needs to be done with respect to validation gen? So currently, validation gen, the work is done in a feature branch, and there are issues there. I don't think that we have tagged. I'll just put that as a to-do maybe, but there are issues there that you can poke around in. So that would be one place to kind of see what is being worked on. But I think that we need to go through and probably tag those with good first issue or help wanted. So I'll just add a to-do there because I don't think that that has been done. But I will link the feature branch here.
Yeah, that'd be helpful just because I've been working with Joel for the last little while on Kube API Linter as well as another tool, but it's more CRD specific. But so kind of getting involved and being involved in some of these discussions is something that I'm interested in. So being able to help with some of these validation gen markers and stuff is like a reasonable entry point.
Totally, yeah, awesome, yeah.
That where to go to see what needs to be done would be helpful.
For sure, yeah. So if you go there, there are discussion issues, and yeah, just poke around there. I think Joel actually kind of flew around there and popped up with some discussions. So yeah, if you just want to check out there, that currently, we'll be sure to tag those. I'll add it to do for myself here. But yeah, like tag one. But I think that's probably the best way to do that.
Yeah. Would it be helpful in a future session to do a deeper dive on ratcheting or immutability specifically, or feature gating specifically, to get a sense on kind of like the main decisions made there? I think you're up. I think you're muted, Joel, but I think you're up.
Well, I was going to kind of change the topic a little bit. I definitely agree going some deeper into some of those topics. I think would be useful for this. But no one else seemed to respond, so I was kind of waiting for other people to respond as well.
I'm going to take that as a yes. We'll bring something. We'll bring something to the group.
So the other thing I was going to bring up is that some of these conversations, when I was reading through them all, there was a lot of talk from people who are very familiar with like core API types. What I thought was missing was the opinion of CRD authors. And so I think that's where people like myself, Bryce, Stefan, have more experience and can try and help with, okay, well, how does this look in controller tools? So for example, we were talking on the feature gating one about the semantics of the if enabled. With core types, yeah, it totally makes sense. You have to have a payload. There's all these different validations and stuff that go on with it. In CRDs, that actually doesn't make sense because of the way that people are leveraging feature gating in CRDs. I know that Gateway API folks have a concept of this where they've mocked up something. We have pretty much identical validation in OpenShift for a similar thing as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, one of the questions I would have is, with all of these discussions that are happening, how do we make sure that the markers and stuff that are being defined obviously work for the core types, but that we consider CRDs and how they're going to work there as well? Because what I don't want to see is us building these things and saying, oh, this is how it works. Then when we come to implement it in CRD, we're like, oh, actually, that's just not going to work. Mm-hmm. And yeah, obviously, I suspect we'll never be able to get them identical, but if we can get them as close as possible.
Absolutely, yeah, and we should make deliberate decisions there. Like some of the tags are super easy, right? Like they're one-to-one to an open API validation concept, and some of them are very close, like the enum concept, right? Like you can easily figure out how to transform that. And even unions, I think you can kind of like, oh, I can see a one-of shape here, and you can kind of figure it out. And then we have things that are very server-side centric. With a lot of history. So let's work through those. If enabled and feature gates is the hardest, because I don't know if everybody's familiar, but what we do in the API server is we don't just go, if there's a feature gate true, then you can write to this field. What we usually do is is we do two passes. We detect if the object is already using a feature, which could be looking at multiple fields. And then we determine that, yes, this feature is in use. We call that in-use detection. And then if either the feature gate is on or in use has been detected as true, then you're allowed to use the feature. So it's a gate in the sense that once an object is in, that it stays in even if the gate's closed, it's still in. So it's a very complicated mechanism. So we'll have to talk through like, what is that? How could that be used in CRDs? There's this big gap on CRDs with feature gating too.
Yeah. So for comparison in CRDs, if you sent the same kind of concept, here's a field on a gate that's not enabled, it's just silently dropped by the API server.
Yeah.
So it's a very different behavior.
Yeah, and we don't even have the machinery. I mean, I guess you could probably contort VAP into getting you something, but like it would be pretty tricky.
I'll come back to you on that because I'm actually POCing something to try that.
Well, let me send you a link. I had actually done an experiment with feature gated VAP.
Yandere, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so I think currently the Kube API linter already enabled the SSA tags in KK. So because Declarative has its own SSA tags with the case prefix, I don't think we are going to merge them together soon. So both of them should exist in a long term for a while. And I want to get some opinion whether we want to support both in a Kube API linter, not only for SSA tags, but for the others have some kind of overlapping tags with the Kube builder and with the same semantics or similar one. I think we better to start to support both before we because eventually we want to merge them together, potentially use the case instead of Kube builder. But I think at least for now we need to support both, or do you think that worth the effort to start? And yeah, just get some opinion and maybe pay more attention on those.
Yeah, so absolutely. There's a few different examples to unpack here. So around, so take for example the Kube builder optional and required tags, right? They have their own specific like Kube builder optional, Kube builder required. In Kube API linter, we actually, well, the default configuration is suggesting that you shouldn't bother with the Kube builder versions and that you should only use the upstream plus optional plus required, right? So that's like the end goal we'd want to get to, where all of the upstream versions, so plus list type in this case, would be suggested to be replaced with the new plus Kate's list type. We don't currently, to my knowledge at least, Bryce, Yongri, I know you both looked at Cal as well, we don't currently have a way to say, if you have this marker, you should also have this marker with the same value or this marker with some transform. Totally open to putting that in. I think that makes sense. I realized that obviously with the list type things, there are other things that depend on this, right? Like Open API generation and stuff that needs updating to support the new list types, controller tools, etc. There's lots of different tools that rely on these. So if there is for a period a need to enforce, if you have this marker, you must also have this one, then let's make the linter do that. I don't think it's super hard. And I think that's the issue you opened, was it yesterday? Don't worry.
Yeah. No, I think the main point is that we better support both at this moment, so that because we are about to open the gate for the DB only stuff, which means the new APIs may only use the case start prefix tags, at least in the native types. So if we want to have the linter that cover those, we probably need to also extend the current linter, Kube API linter, to support those prefix. Maybe like some lists will only have the case list type without the list type we already have in SSA text linter.
We do have a linter implementation that allows you to forbid certain markers. So I wonder if there could be like some sort of usage of that in terms of like for these particular API, like exclude linting all of these existing APIs or whatever, and for new APIs, enforce this rule where any tag that isn't a Kate's, whatever, declarative validation tag is forbidden that you have like a direct mapping for or a preference.
So one of the nuances we have to deal with the declarative validation tags is that they chain, which is a new thing that we don't have in any existing tags and not in KubeBuilder at least. So I don't think Kube API Linters marker parsing at the moment could handle, for example, the if enabled plus Kates. I didn't think that's what we settled on, wasn't it? If enabled plus Kates, blah. So that's another part that we're going to have to do. So how that then will work, for example, is there any purpose in if enabled on an SSA tag? Probably not. I don't know. This is something we're going to have to think about pretty soon as we start implementing more of the DV stuff.
I feel that's a broader problem because the chaining stuff is not actually the same parsing way in the controller tools, right? We're using different parsing mechanism to use in the interpretation. We have a chaining mechanism and use it in a CodeGen, the Django to parse the chaining. But in the controller tools, it doesn't have the same way. I think the Kube API Linter uses similar parsing mechanism in the controller tools, right? And it's also a kind of different relationship.
Yeah, what we did for declarative validation is we basically have a kind of tag that has a very consistent style to it, and so we're not mixing that with like other tags that exist in the legacy system that had other parsers and other structure. I don't know if we could extend that to KubeBuilder, but maybe we could, right? Like maybe we could just say like, this is a universe of tags that work together. We do in Django have a parser specifically for that gives you structured output back, so you don't have to write a separate parser. I was looking for the link to that, but that's the way we do it on the DV side. So we actually declare our supported set of tags, and then our parser just like fills things in for us very cleanly.
I think there's some hand. Bryce, do you want to kind of see your hand up?
Sure. I think Lalo was first up. So if you have something on this, you can go ahead.
Sorry about that. Lalo, do you want to?
Yeah, so I just want to repeat what Joe said. You have to use Django to parse chain tags. There was no concept of chain tags like before validation, like DV. Now this is a concept of, we introduced the concept of chaining, and syntax it can be understood just by Django only. So ideally, we should use Django to parse this and understand like. And I think there will be some payload ruling also, right? What payloads can be applied to certain tags. So we have to use Django there. For existing one, I think we can keep. Existing one are usually key value pairs in the tags. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, I think as long as there's, which it looks like there is already parsing logic for Django. Like I think it should be fairly straightforward for us to be able to implement the reading of those tags then in something like Kube API Linter. I think we could do like a trivial thing where we like look at the suffix of the tag, and if it starts with Kate's colon, like we can circle over to, okay, let's do the declarative validation tag parsing. And if it's any other kind of suffix or prefix, we roll back to the existing parsing logic that we have that handles like existing controller tools, KubeBuilder style markers. We do have like a particular format that we try to put the tags that we read into, so that way we can use them within the linters. I'd have to look more in depth and to see like, is there a reasonable mapping in the way that those markers, the declarative validation markers are done today, that we can remap those to our Kube API Linter internal representation of markers. But I don't really see why that shouldn't be possible.
Yeah, let us know how that goes. We had known there was a difference. We chose to take an opinion on a bunch of things, but we did try and give the name spacing to at least allow like making it easier for like a first pass sieve to be able to split out different, kube builder : versus Kate's : type of stuff.
Just on the concept of chaining. So I know there's the if enabled, if disabled. There's each item, each key. Is that right? Are there any others that do this kind of chaining behavior?
Yeah, there's a subfield one that goes into a subfield of an object. That's really useful when you're composing with shared objects like object metadata. And you're like, oh, I have an opinion about the way the name of this object should be validated, which is actually really common. So that's a classic use case. You can kind of do that in OpenAPI either with Olive, or you can just repeatedly define metadata and only redefine the name fields and put validations on them, and it knows what to do. So there's a couple ways to get it through OpenAPI. I don't know what the kube builder equivalent is for validating an object name, but I'm guessing you guys have something.
Cell at the moment. But
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's fine. So there's an open PR. Is it PR or an issue on controller tools about the subfield behavior, which I asked to hold off until we cemented the Kate subfield once. That's easy. Each value we have an equivalent of the Kate's item. I think we have a value equivalent of each key. We don't currently. But yeah, okay, that's good. Good to know.
Joel, did you say each key is the only delta, or was there another one? Sorry, I'm just trying to track.
Each key, each val is subfield. I think.
What's the difference between each val and so we have like a item based one, right? So that you can apply validation to items within a list. I believe that will also apply to values in a map. Someone on the CRD side.
Each val. I think that's equivalent to each val.
So I think we have that same marker do two things currently. But I can't think of anything that does each key.
Does ours do both as well? Does our each value do slices and map key values?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's actually, we actually picked the same thing there.
Okay. So
I guess
what is Kate's item different then?
So Kate's item, it's if you have list type, if you have a list type map that has that's keyed by types, then you can select a specific keyed item by the list map keys. So for example, if you want to do a condition validation that if something is approved, then it has to have a certain criteria, then you would use Kate's item select on like type approved, because that's a key, right? So it's like indexing into the map entry, and then for a map entry that matches that selector, then you can do a validation. But it has to we don't have this kind of selection for any other case. It's only for list type maps.
Okay.
This is because conditions are contorted, and so you want a virtual field, but it's actually a map key.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we would do that with cell. Cool. And yeah, the if enabled, if disabled, there's some differences between what I've seen in the discussion for the core types, but I think that's something we can create that works with CRDs as long as we're happy that there's that slight difference. But yeah, everything else seems reasonable.
Excellent.
Cool. Let's see if there's any hands up right now. All right. So, let me get back to. I think this is pretty much what the discussion's been around. I think, did anyone else have any topics for discussion? I think right now, maybe for the next meeting, some of the AIs I wrote down, I think there's maybe a handful of other items, but it sounds like maybe nailing this if enabled, this if disabled formatting could be a great topic for the future. Also, how to parse DB tags. I don't know if maybe that was finally done, but maybe if we could discuss how that's done. I think maybe immutability, or was there anything else? I'm just trying to jot down if there's anything, folks. Maybe how to contribute to DB also. Do folks like some of the topics identified there? Was there anything else that folks hope to discuss, maybe around, kind of control some of the semantic differences of the tags, or the future of some of the linting there?
It might. I don't know how Joel feels about this, but it might be reasonable, like, because we have a bunch of like wish list items, at least, because over on OpenShift we're doing a bunch of like CRD type linting rules, but it might be nice to kind of go through that set of wish lists that we already have, see what makes sense for both CRD and core cube types, and have like a way that we can prioritize, like, let's focus on, while we're doing all this DV linting kind of work all together, we can kind of prioritize those and get more folks kind of getting those linters in place. That way we've got better feedback for reviewers to be able to see on like linting checks and things like that. So that's like one of those things where I don't think that we have like a actual structured, like, we would really like to get these linters done before any other ones yet, but that might be like a nice action item to kind of go through here.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. The folks, like, I think, just maybe identify what those best lint rules would be that helps those folks. I think that'd be awesome. I don't know if you had a list, but maybe next time if you could present that or we could discuss it, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I think either Joel or I could kind of come up with some list or reference the list that we currently have and walk through them, add any new ones that we think we might be missing.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'll try and put together a list of the existing ones that can go straight into KK, the ones that depend on DV to go into KK, and then I'll put together a list of the ones that are kind of upcoming. There are a bunch of open issues on the repo already for the kind of upcoming ones. But yeah, I'll try and identify what actually only makes sense for CRDs, what is waiting on DV, and what's ready to go, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, no, that's a really good alignment to have. It'd be super disappointing if DV had gotten in front of the linter and then added something that didn't lint right. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Cool. All right, I think that might conclude this meeting. I think that's all the topics. Feel free if anyone has any kind of last minute hands or anything. But if not, we could end maybe a little early. And
just to double check, I'm sorry I joined late. Does everybody know where to chat asynchronously after this meeting?
I was just going to ask that question because I know that for the stuff we were doing for Cube API Linter and Certify, we created the SIG API Machinery Dev Tools Slack channel. I don't know if we were planning to reuse that or if there's a new Slack channel that was created for like these discussions.
Currently, there is no new Slack channel, so I think reusing that channel would be the easiest, low friction way if everyone is on board with that. I'm happy to go through the process of making a channel, but maybe the SIG API Machinery Dev Tools channel would be a great choice. Do folks maybe want to thumbs up, or just if the folks feel good about that? I think Bryce just posted a link there. So yeah, maybe that can be our async. I'll put that in the notes. I see a thumbs up. All right, awesome.
Yeah, it looks like we got a question from
Yeah, I think Abdul, you got a hand up there.
Thank you. So I just want to quickly ask, is it will be right? I just want to quickly ask for a new contributor like is there any documentation or resource that can get me started start contributing?
For sure, yeah. So I think that's a great question. Is this around DV? You're saying maybe how to get started, can you contribute? So we linked, at least for declarative validation, we linked some of the docs here. Sorry, up in the meeting around. Let me just find where the feature branches. So this is where the feature branches. So you can kind of poke around there to see the feature. It's under this validation gen. If you want to look at some of the PRs there. There's also documentation around the feature itself, how to activate it and use it, and also just generally how to use these tags. So maybe if you want to look at some of the links in the docs here, do you have any specific questions? Does that maybe some of those references help?
Yeah. Could there also be like a hands-on learning task that would help kind of solidify that? I mean, I know that we have some like just max length things and stuff that need to be added. Could we suggest one of those?
sure. I'm trying to think of what the best, because right now I think
we
like
can do it
maybe,
async too.
yeah, we can do
right,
it.
like-
Yeah. Maybe Abdul, if
Yeah.
you want to join this chat and just ping out, we can message you around that. But yeah, we do have some work there. Like I think adding a min link tag, for example. Yeah, there are some for sure. Cool. So maybe we'll just chat async around work here in the SIG dev. Yeah, machinery dev tools. And then I'll just grab this link. Thank you for that. So yeah, just async chat locations. Right, get a hand there. All right. And I'll put this at the top too, just after this meeting. I'll kind of identify this as the place to discuss things in this meeting. Okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks for calling that out, Joe. I think that is a great point. Cool. All right. Well, if there's no other items, I think we can conclude this meeting. And yeah, thanks everybody. And yeah, hop on the chat there. We can discuss anything further. Cool. Thanks everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks. Yeah.